Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the person who runs the show over at the comic site, The Beat. It's Heidi MacDonald. Thanks for coming on, Heidi.
Hey, David. How's it going?
Oh, it's so great. It's so great. What a crazy time in the world and comics and everything else. We're going to get into the comics part, but I wanted to start by asking, you know, you have a lot to manage at The Beat. You're busy. You got a busy life. So let's start there. Who's having a tougher time right now? Comics journalists trying to keep up with all the change, or New York Mets fans?
Mets fans.
Oh,
I don't think anyone's having a worse time than Mets fans right now.
I'm so sorry.
You notice how my voice fell? I mean, I don't even know what to say about the Mets fans.
Do you get more upset about Mets stuff or comic stuff?
Well, comic stuff. I mean, Mets is just it's well documented that sports fandom is just a straw man for real life. It's a hobby horse on which to unleash our emotions and use our territorial instincts and just basically use all of our caveman or cave person instincts on sports teams, so it's always phony, but it becomes real after a long time. And I mean, it's I'm not going to lose sleep over the Mets. It's just it's sometimes fun.
I'm a Seattle Mariners fan. I'm like the king of sometimes fun. It's been a long time since, I mean, this current team is fun, but it's still like 20 years since they made the playoffs. But anyways, I won't go any further into sports because I've had accusations of trying to turn this into a sports podcast before. But
well, David, you should do that if you want to make money.
I should. What am I doing? I'm totally the wrong subject here. There's so many sports podcasts, though.
Yeah, but there are so many sports podcasts because you can make actually money at them. So
that's true, and there are also a lot of comics podcasts. So my argument is nothing. But let's get into the comic stuff. I liked you wrote a newsletter, your most recent newsletter, I believe. You compared this recent stretch to the 10 days in September from 2009 when Disney bought Marvel. How did you phrase it? Was it just 10 days in September?
Well, it literally was just within a 10-day period. It was like Monday, Disney bought Marvel, and then like about 7 days later or 10 days later, the next week, Paul Levitt stepped down at Warner Brothers, and after running the company for 20 plus years, and though the events were not connected, the timing was just a coincidence. It was still pretty abrupt and pretty shocking, and that really set off the era of comics that we're in now, for sure, or that we have been up until now. And I do think we're entering a new era of comics pretty quickly. Or the pandemic has changed everything, and post-pandemic comics are going to be very, very different. So
yeah. Well, you compared it to the current stretch we're in, where basically there was a combination of Substack getting into the comics game in a major way, and DC partnering up with Webtoon to produce comics on the platform. I mean, they're different beasts, but I think they're similarly incendiary, even if the moves don't necessarily have the same curb appeal. I mean, like when you get bought by Disney, that's obviously going to have a lot more wide stream appeal. But I really think that was a fair comparison. But before we get into the specifics of the deal, I'm curious, like, what's your larger read on this stretch? Is this like kind of, if not the beginning of a kind of new era, is it at least like a really big transitional stretch in your opinion?
So I do think, I call it the pandemic shift. And I do think the pandemic has completely upended a lot of what we previously thought was normal. And we're never going back to that time. We're never going back to the way things were in February 2020. Just too much has changed. And there have been too many ramifications. And we will rebuild all the things that we liked about that world, but they'll be very new and different. And I said I was going to reference this, but I have two retail columnists. So one of them, Brandon Schatz, wrote a column today where he basically said, that's it. Hindsight's 2020. He says the post-normal times is what he called it. And so if the pandemic hadn't come along, all of these things would have happened, but would they have happened within an 18-month stretch? I'm not sure that is correct. I don't think they would have happened quite so quickly or quite so, bam, bam, just one after the other. So I do think the pandemic is the accelerant as they call it these days. But they were things that were brewing for a long time. So we're just seeing them all come to fruition right now because people are stuck at home and have a lot of time to think about things.
Hmm. I don't know. I would be very interested. This is like the dumbest alternate history thing. I'm watching the For All Mankind series that's on Apple Plus TV right now, which is an amazing alternate history. But I don't know without the pandemic if Substack happens. I think that required a breakdown within the industry that drove someone, in this case, Nick Spencer, to try to find alternative options and then carried everyone along or invited everyone along with. I don't know if that happens without it.
Well, possibly, but I want to point out that almost all of these things actually have their roots pre-pandemic.
Sure.
The Webtoon deal had been in the works for a long time. I'm not sure it was exactly pre-pandemic, but it had been quite a long time that it was in the works. And so the Substack thing at least goes back a year. And yeah, I guess that's post-pandemic. I mean, I think the Substack deal is much more tech-based, and I think I'll circle back to that, just why I think that happened and why the timing is relevant. But I give Nick Spencer props. I mean, did he go to Substack because he's a somewhat semi-canceled person, and he saw Substack was open to semi-canceled people and realized that this was a good deal, or did he really see opportunities for cartoonists? And I mean, until he speaks out on that, we're not going to know, and I don't know that he ever will. So
I don't think he will. I don't know. I think the reason why this stretch is such a big deal is it feels, and I think Brandon touched on this. This all sort of feels like a recognition by people within comics, particularly like the direct market associated ones, that the digital side of things should be a much bigger part of the equation than it has been. And I think that's huge because,
yes.
I mean, like you said, like the Webtoon deal was Bobby Chase was working on that. I mean, there was a number of people that were working that on DC that are no longer there. And it's part of a larger recognition and a growing shift that digital, I mean, I think people have long realized that digital is additive, not necessarily a replacement. And I think this is them trying to, everyone trying to find a way to blend these things together in a way that works for the most amount of people possible.
Yes. So, just to kind of, again, give the whole picture, there's been so many other digital developments, right? And looking at Webtoon, I don't think you can look at that without the context of the space race between Tapas and Webtoon. They are in a race between Tapas and Webtoon. Their Korean parent companies are in a race to see who can get their IPO first. And I just saw that a Chinese company also has gone big into Webtoon. So, that's a very obvious hey, people are reading a lot of things on the web when they're reading a lot of web comics. So let's get into this business. It's very obvious. I do think that's pandemic related. But how many times have we talked during this whole thing? I think this might be the second time that we've talked. Probably was a year ago, right?
It was December. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and maybe we spoke a little bit during the whole Diamond. I mean, we certainly gossiped enough, so maybe it just seemed like we did a podcast. But the Diamond thing happened back in April, so that was April 2020. So that is what is that? That's math challenge, 16 months. A year and a half. Things happened a year and a half ago. But again, there's so many things that people were talking about doing, and we do know that DC was very interested in leaving Diamond, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Diane Nelson and Dan DiDio had a plan. And we do know that Penguin Random House was approached about, I'm not sure directly by DC, but they were definitely involved in talks about distributing comics, distributing periodicals for years. And so all of these ideas do go back before the pandemic. And I mean, Image Comics. I think one of the most interesting things right now is what is Image's position in the industry? In a month they're going to be Diamond's biggest client, and they have stuck with Diamond through thick and thin. Although there's a lot of issues going on with Diamond, and Are they going to stick with Diamond? Because if they leave, that that's it. Curtain call, circle, that's down the drains. So, but we know that image has been in play in a certain way. IDW, a lot of companies don't even have deals with Diamond, and for a long time. So I think it's important to know that this is the pandemic shift that everybody has. Everyone I talk to about this, retailers, creators, convention companies, me, is like, yeah, I always wanted to have a website. So when this happened, I sat down and made a website. I sat down and made an e-commerce store. We did the things that we were just talking about. So basically, it got us off our asses, David.
Yeah. I mean, it was breaking of the treadmill. Everyone was running, and then everyone had to stop for a second. They're like, how could I do this better? And I don't know, it's been really interesting. I have to admit, the initial lineup for the Substack was extremely not surprising, if only because, I mean, if you would have bet on, if you had to like set the odds on who would jump on a deal like that, James Tynan would be probably number one on that list.
Right.
I mean, absolutely. So, well, let's get into Substack in specific. So, for listeners that don't know, Substack is a email newsletter company that has gotten into comics with creators like Jonathan Hickman, James Tynan IV, the newly minted Jeff Lemire, and more signing up to create content via this platform for subscribing fans. Depending on who you ask, it's either a game-changing entry into comics or a nightmare mixed with a tourist in the world of comics. What's your take? Life changer or a brief flirtation between venture capital dollars and comics?
I think it's going to be the brief flirtation, because I don't think they have infrastructure right now that's going to be pleasing to people. And also, as I said elsewhere today on a message board, when you have $107 subs, they stack up very fast. There's 30 or 40 of these cartoonists involved in this. So let's say we all want to subscribe to that. So again, a math challenge. So let's say
$210.
Yes, very good. Look at him. I could have figured that out. I'm telling you, I could have figured it out. All right, that's $210. Now I'm going to do with my little calculator I have here. Now, how many print comics would that be a month? Let's say there were $5 a pop.
That's 42.
42. Okay. So you would get more 22-page pamphlets for your money in print than you're getting online. For this money. So, and we don't even know if we're getting 22 pages a month, right? So it's I mean, $7 doesn't seem like much, but as a like with the Beat, we were talking about how are we going to do these? How are we going to review them? How are we just going to get a group subscription or something and everybody pitch in $20 or something? So
they should do that. They should do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's quite a bit. So we don't know what the format's going to be. And I mean, we do know that people will read comics on their iPad. I mean, we've certainly talked about that on your podcast before. It's a very pleasant reading experience, or even on their Kindle, their color Kindle. But how are you going to port it over? How are you going to read these damn things? And
are you subscribed to any of them?
I have subscribed to Tynian's because I wanted to read his new 52 history. That's what I'd rather read, David, they've reinvented Patreon.
Well, I mean, kind of. I don't think that that's necessarily true, because Patreon, I mean, you have a Patreon. Patreon, I talked to somebody at Patreon once, just as a person who's a creator on there, about like how to like make some of the functionality for writing things on there better. And they're like, this is not a blog. That was almost a direct quote of what they said. Substack is built for writing about things. I mean, like, I'm subscribed to one of the ones I'm subscribed to is Hickman's, and Hickman and Mike Del Mundo and Mike Huddleston have produced a lot on there already. It's very robust. And the thing that's really important about it, though, is it's a really good reading experience in terms of the actual text. It is much better than Patreon. So I don't know, like, I know people have derisively suggested that it is a replacement for Patreon, but it's kind of, it is, but it also isn't. And I don't know. I mean, the comics thing, I mean, that's going to be the tricky part is, is it going to be a remotely nice experience reading those on there? Because I've been told, what I've heard is it's either going to be like JPEGs via email or downloadable PDFs, or maybe they're going to like try to develop a reader of some variety. But that's kind of a pretty secondary consideration for something that they've launched in full already.
Right.
And it doesn't exactly instill a lot of confidence in people that they're going to deliver the comic reading experience that people want. But here's my take. One of the things that I slightly disagree with you on is I don't think the people who are subscribing to this stuff are solely looking for comics. I think that this, like reading Hickman stuff and reading, like, let's say Chip stuff, those things are very unique experience. It's almost, people are going to be mad at me for saying this. It's like a mixture between Patreon and Cameo, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, or OnlyFans. I mean,
Yeah.
I get that. Now, is Hickman doing actual comics yet?
They've released an introductory comic and they've released designs and stuff like that, but there's only been one comic so far. And actually on the 4th, there's going to be a big event for subscribers because Hickman will be doing a live interview of Grant Morrison on there, which is pretty wild, which has absolutely nothing to do with the comic,
Right.
presumably. But yeah, I mean, they're putting a lot of the world building up front and then the comics are coming next. But I mean, that's the thing is, when I talked to people before this was announced, basically everyone was telling me that comics do not have to actually be published on there. They can be whatever content you want. I mean, Scott Snyder is a perfect example of that. He's not even doing comics. It's just a writing class.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, the problem with all of this is, so I was already subscribing to a bunch of these newsletters. I had definitely subscribed to Tiny Ends because, he is definitely a thought leader. And as I always say, he's leveled up immensely. And just watching his thought process on his newsletter over the last year has been incredible because he's really gone, he's gone from being the most loyal company man to DC to someone who's really broken the mold there and is really, thinking about how to have a career that isn't beholden to the big two. So I really enjoyed reading his newsletter. And of course, I've subscribed to Chip Zdarsky's because he's hilarious. And,
Right.
I subscribed to Matthew Rosenberg's because he's really funny. Now, I'm wondering, all these people who started Substacks over the last 6 months, probably, now it's pretty obvious
Yeah.
why they did it.
That's a research project right there.
Yeah. And so reading them is definitely, I mean, I enjoy getting these newsletters. It's definitely something I read before I read other content in my inbox, which includes hundreds of emails, right? But now that I'm paying for it, I probably am a little more demanding. And you know what? It's just more content. It's just more. I mean,
It's so
there's
much reading.
already there's so much reading. I mean, I can't barely read comics anymore. I mean, I don't, I have to specially set aside a whole week where I take time off from the beat just so I can catch up on some of my comics, because there's so much content on the web and you never know what's going to be important. I mean, you do, but maybe you don't.
Yeah.
And that's, you become anxious about it. So I think even, I'm not going to name names, but there was one Substack creator who, sent out a little teaser and I was just, something we've seen 50 times before. So you can probably guess who I mean. And, cause I meant literally 50 times. And so, I'm already tired of it. And, so they should have announced it. Apparently there was internal discussion about whether they should announce it all at once or spread it out. And I think they should have done it all at once, shock and awe, like they do at Image Expo. Remember Image Expo? Shock and awe?
But I think that launching with the 6, I think that accomplished it. I will say in one way, I don't know if spreading it out one by one at this point is really working. Because it's like, having Scotty Young pop up and then who followed Scotty Young? I don't even remember.
Right.
Donnie Cates and Ryan
Right.
Stegman, and then having
Did they do it? I forgot.
They did, yeah.
I literally forgot.
I mean, that's the thing is like when they kind of pop up as these onesie twosie things, it kind of it's like they always have more power in crowds. Like if they just kept doing the six person drops, I think that would be a little bit more impactful from a generating interest, because then it feels like a really big deal as opposed to like this person started a newsletter.
So, David, it's amazing that we're doing this today, September 1st, because this is the 10-year anniversary
Oh, it's the New 52.
Of the New 52, that's right. And if you remember, when they were announcing the New 52,
All 52 at once.
they did, but no, they also, they I think they did it over a week.
Did they?
Where yes, because I know they spaced it out
Oh,
so
I
that
think, was it
every
13,
day.
13, 13? Because they did the 4
Yeah.
waves. Yeah.
Yes, they did do 4 waves, and it became a very exciting thing. It's like, "Oh, it's Monday, we're gonna get 13 new teams," you know?
Hmm.
And so I think what you just nailed it. I think if they were doing a drop every Monday
Yeah.
where they announced 6 new creators, it would be so much more impactful. But just having everybody suddenly pop up with their Substack is, I'm already over it. I'm already really tired of it, and I'm not going to subscribe to 40 newsletters.
If you think it's a brief flirtation, do you think the main issue is the fact that they're not going to prove to be viable, or in terms of money, monetarily? Or do you think it's more that creatively it's going to, I mean, they're going to do a great job creatively, but maybe that won't be the best comic delivery system?
So I think today there was another news drop which nobody really paid attention to.
Are you talking about the ComiXology one?
The ComiXology. Yeah, did you notice? No, I thought that was going to cause a hullabaloo, and it didn't.
I honestly, I have to say, I don't really think. Okay, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't really look at it as a huge deal beyond the fact. Okay, what was it? It was ComiXology has a new app, and ComiXology now is integrating purely through Amazon, which, I mean, it makes sense. It's like they are owned by Amazon. Why have multiple logins? I've been logging in through Amazon for years, so it's not really that big of a deal for me. But I don't know. I guess what was the seismic aspect of that?
I guess to me it was just that ComiXology as a standalone website is going to disappear, and there's a lot of information on there that's very, very comic centric. I mean, that site was built by comics fans for comics fans. So if very often when you are searching for a comic, ComiXology is one of the first links that you get, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this on my Beat Slack today, but if you're looking for a cover image or an interior image, you go to ComiXology. It has the credits, it has the editor, it has the letterer, it has the colorist, it has all that. Amazon doesn't have that.
I go to Comic Vine, to be honest, which is funny because it's the only thing I go to Comic Vine for.
Oh, well, I guess we'll all go to Comic Vine, isn't that owned by CBS?
I think so.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's just, I think you're right. I overestimated the number of people who were angry at Amazon who still used ComiXology. I think they all left a long time ago, the Amazon users. But there was a few tweets about it because ComiXology has had their submit program for a long time, and there's definitely some questions about how things that were done through submit weren't being listed on Amazon, and would they be? And there's ComiXology originals. I mean, it's definitely tamping down of the ComiXology brand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I saw their official Twitter account was trying to dispute that, but when you go, it's like with Newsarama. Newsarama's Games Radar now, my friend.
Does Newsarama technically exist anymore?
I mean, no.
Right? I mean, it's really weird. It's interesting that you would buy Newsarama and then get rid of the brand, because it's like, if you're not, I mean, no offense to everybody that is involved with that site, but it's like a lot of what you're buying is like people knowing that exists. And now it really, I mean, I think you pointed this out when the deal was made. It kind of sucks because a lot of content was lost in there.
But all the archives were lost. And
yeah.
So I'm looking at it now, actually. It does say Newsarama. It has a little Newsarama logo, but I mean, there's no, like, all the URLs are, don't mention Newsarama. It's just a landing page.
So I think, okay, so in a weird way, I think we've accidentally come on to an interesting point about Substack. Okay, so we talked about ComiXology, and that's new news. But then also, it points out the fact that you brought up ComiXology Originals. Right before the Substack deal was Scott Snyder's big deal with ComiXology Originals, where he was going to be launching 8 new books through them, all announced at once, which is funny because a lot of people told me that they thought the biggest mistake with that was that they didn't announce them in waves. And so anyways, but I do think it's interesting though. And I do wonder if this is one of the core issues with like Substack as a platform, is like, once you get through the hardcore fans, it's going to be really hard to keep people's attention, and it's going to be really hard to keep driving people to that. maybe that's not a big deal because, I mean, honestly, everything I heard about the initial signups was the numbers were huge. Like they
Right.
did really, really well. So maybe that's less of a big deal because the hardcores are pretty hardcore and they're a significant audience. But it is interesting because the news cycle is so fleeting, and because our attention is so fleeting, I don't know like how you keep excitement up for all these different options. And I don't know if that's a problem or if it's just going to lead to consolidation, kind of like with Newsrama.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, I think there will be consolidation. And again, I mean, how you originally characterized this deal, I think is the most accurate. It's a lot of VC money, and what's significant to me is that they're throwing it at the latest hot thing, and the latest hot thing happens to be comics, and that's also part of the ComiXology. I mean, it's did Amazon absorb ComiXology? Yes, but they also spent the time. I'm sure this deal, the idea of integrating it all was there from day one, in 2014 when this deal was made. But basically, digital comics are going to have a larger footprint on Amazon. They're going to be, I mean, guess maybe the boys will even have a link to buy the comic,
My
right?
God, that's
Right? Things,
insane.
yes, things like that, which um don't, or Invincible, all these comics based things on Amazon Prime. So, um, I do think that the nut graph of all of this is that during the pandemic, reading stayed stable. And
Hmm.
despite what you said about digital at the start of this, printed reading matter did not die. In
No,
fact, it's bigger than ever.
right.
Comics are bigger than ever. By every metric, they're selling more than ever.
Hmm.
And maybe not every kind of comic, but there's definitely more eyeballs reading the digital, but all the print comics are also selling more. So I don't think that's lost on people with lots of money.
Right. I mean, God, did you see the CGC got bought by like some horrifying sounding group like Blackstone
Mhm.
Tactical Operations or some shit like
Yeah,
that? I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean the money, the print part is a really interesting part, and I'm not saying that digital is growing to diminish print. I just think that it's a recognition that it can be like one of the things I'm wondering is whether or not, like for example with Substack or with ComiXology Originals and like Scott Snyder's deal with ComiXology Originals, is that to a certain degree a replacement for the single issue portion of the whole platform? Because let's be honest, all these books are going to come out in print.
Yes.
I mean, Scott's deal, I mean, ComiXology Originals has a deal with Dark Horse, so all these books are coming out in print through there. Every single Substack thing, I would be shocked if they didn't come out in print.
They said that they were going to do that.
Right.
I mean, Tiny and Snyder were very clear that they were going to come out in print. And I don't think there's anyone who's been announced on this deal yet who is not a fan of print comics and who doesn't. I mean, why would you? It's another revenue stream. So you're going to want it to come out in print. So yeah, but is this the death of the pamphlet? Is this the death of the floppy? I mean,
I will say that's not what I'm necessarily saying. I'm just saying that I think that it does take its part in, like, to a certain degree, in certain aspects, part of that chain, of that
right.
flow.
Yes, and I do think the periodical is imperiled, just as the comic strip is imperiled. Like the comic strip was once the most popular form of comics in America, and if you had a successful comic strip, you could be a millionaire. So it was also economically viable for the people who made them, which is a very key part of any economy, obviously. So those shrank as newspapers shrank due to the rise of the internet. I mean, the internet replaces some things with brutal efficiency, like newspapers and comic strips,
Right.
right? And so it's, web comics came up at the same time that the newspapers were dying, and people still like to read a comic every day if you're very lucky, which is very rare, or every week or every Tuesday and Thursday or whatever the schedule is for them, right? So webcomics absolutely replaced the stick it to your refrigerator feeling that you
Hmm.
had with comic strips, the Far Side. But you had to print them up yourself, so that made it a little harder. So yeah, I think serialization does seem to to be more imperiled by a digital model,
Sure.
I think, than a binge of a graphic novel. So I do think it is somewhat additive to the periodical, but why is the periodical in danger? It's just because the big two have made it so non-vital.
Yeah.
Just so non-vital to read, and with their corporate mandates, and it is more power to Scott Snyder or James Tynion or Jonathan Hickman, who somewhat rises through the system and manages to gain a creative profile. But it's just a very, very hard place to really stand out and to really produce groundbreaking work, I think.
I do think it's really interesting to see, like you cited, responses to the Substack deal from a couple retailers in your newsletter, Katie Pride and Brian Hibbs, and they were not super enthusiastic about it. And it is kind of interesting though, because Brian also talks about how basically Marvel and DC are like tanking the single issue market effectively. And it is interesting because I feel like it's tough to not, I don't know, for me it's like, how can you be against the Substack deal, but also admit that the structures of the world that these creators exist within are struggling right now? And it's like those, you would think one would chase one to the other, if that makes sense. Like they work together.
It does, but people want to keep their business model. Did you see what Brian wrote today or yesterday on Facebook?
I did, yes.
Yes, and well, just for the people listening to this who might not have
access to Brian.
Access. You see, I can't. That's the thing about me and the pandemic and just being in my house by myself all the time, talking to my cats. It's like I forget words all the time. I do know, so this is what Brian wrote. I know absolutely for certain that being dependent on Marvel and DC for serializing the correct work that the market actually desires, that will thereafter live on for perennial sales, has become a fool's errand in the last decade or so. This saddens me because how can you fuck up a good thing that badly?
Yeah.
So, but when was the last periodical perennial?
You mean that turned into a collection that was sold forever?
Yes.
1987. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I guess it depends on what your bar is for a periodical perennial that sells forever. I mean, like Long Halloween, Batman Hush, Saga, Walking Dead. I mean, it depends on how generously you want to say sells forever.
Right.
I mean, like, I would say that more recently, God, and like Invincible. I mean, honestly, I had Patrick Brower from Challengers Comics and Conversation in Chicago tell me that Invincible has driven more sales for them than any adaptation since Batman 1989,
Yeah.
which is astonishing.
Right. Yes, it's astonishing, and it's not surprising. When you have great. Oh, sorry, my phone's going off with the alarm. I don't know if you can hear it, listeners, but we got a hurricane, or pardon me, tropical storm going on here. Just got a flood alert, and the rain just intensified. So literally, the rain started to get louder, and my phone went off with a weather alert. So nice.
Yeah.
And the rain's getting louder and louder. So okay.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick second to talk about Macroverse. Macroverse is a next-gen mobile comics app, with its tap story format making comics feel totally native on mobile devices, which you can experience over 45 series and 400 episodes, with more launching all the time. It's a perfect time to try it out, too. Many of the most popular titles like Hex 11, Deadtown, Glitch, and more are free for a limited time only, so download the app for iOS or Android and binge away. Oh, and keep an eye out on macroverse.com for some major updates on new creators, new series, and new features that bring real collectability to digital comics in a new way. Massive things are coming. If you love making, reading, and or collecting comics, you won't want to miss what Macroverse is launching this summer. And now, back to the show. But I mean, I guess my ultimate point though is like maybe Invincible, but I don't know. I mean, I'm curious as to your read on like the kind of retail response to some of this stuff, because you accurate. You shared what Katie and Brian had to say, and they were, they had questions about Substack, which I don't blame them. I mean,
Right,
it's their
absolutely.
business. But then on the flip side, you totally guessed that they were going to be upset or that retailers as a whole would be upset about the DC and Webtoon deal. And Brian actually made a post saying basically that why would he be upset about that? There's no reason to be upset about that. I don't
Ha
know.
ha! Why would I care about your puny webtoons?
Oh my
That's
God.
what Brian Hibbs sounds like, by the way. That's just me doing, a very broad interpretation. Yeah, that blew my mind. I have not nailed it. Like things that I just, I thought people would be upset about ComiXology and they weren't. I thought retailers would be upset about DC and Webtoon and they weren't. But then that thread
Right up
of,
from Brandon.
yeah, no, when Brian did, say this on again a Facebook post, and then the comments did take a turn for the testy.
Yes.
So perhaps, I mean, I've seen this for 40 years. I've been in the, I guess next year is my 40-year anniversary in the comics industry. And I've seen this so many times. It's just, and I'm sure I'm definitely guilty of it in media and journalism where, I like doing what I do. And when the new way comes along, I reject it. And, who's laughing now? Not me. So, I mean, Webtoon and Tapas and webcomics have a pretty giant readership. Now, I do not think that those numbers that they post all the time are entirely accurate. However, they have thousands of readers, hundreds of thousands of readers,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And um, so it's like, yeah, why? Like you thought putting an 80-page giant in Walmart was going to absolutely destroy the direct sales market. Comment. It didn't. And you think giving people Batman for free with a whole new aesthetic is just fine for your business?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that comes down to whether or not they. I mean, I just think at this point they don't really look at digital as a true threat to what they're doing,
Right.
and I don't know if they're necessarily wrong, but I don't know. I mean, one thing I thought was interesting was just kind of seeing how some people responded to the idea that that could possibly lead to gains for comics. My thing, I actually think that DC teaming up with Webtoon is, I mean, that's one of those things. If you have the opportunity to do it, why the hell would you not? Because
Right.
if you even get a fraction of the total readership, regardless of what the number is, that's going to be potentially career or life changing, game changing number of new readers. If in
Mhm.
theory, like even if they just bought one trade a month, that would be a lot of money coming in.
Right.
And if you're trying to build gateways to different audiences, it just seems like such a slam dunk to me.
Right, right. Yeah, it does. So maybe, I mean, I'm happy that Brian wasn't upset. I'm happy that retailers weren't upset about this because it is pretty much a slam dunk and in reaching a new audience. But I mean, the audience that reads Webtoon and that reads these, well, Webtoon is actually the generic term in Korea for webcomics, by the way.
Right.
Like Kakao is they invented the term Webtoon. Like, so all these companies call them Webtoon. So I'm just going to call them Webtoon, even though that implies an endorsement of Naver's Webtoon. So anyway, it's just like,
It's a blanket statement.
King Features owns comics.com or whatever. So the audience that reads these Webtoons is very clearly very different from the one that goes to comic shops every Wednesday. That's just a fact. And it's predominantly female, and you could see, one of the great things about these platforms is you can see what's popular just by clicking on it. It's very transparent what people are liking, and it's all rom-coms, fantasy romance. I mean, there's an
Slice of
element of
life.
slice of life. There's always an element of relationships to it, right? And I do think DC's characters could port over very, very well to coffee shop AU type fiction.
Yeah.
Because that's what fans do. They already write their own fanfic. That's about all this kind of stuff.
Wait, really quick. I mean, just look at what their most successful. I mean, I don't even know what you call them anymore, but DC Inc. and DC Zoom, like the I don't even, was it Zoom? I don't even, might have just
Well, it was Zoom and Ink. Yes,
yeah,
you're
Zoom and Ink.
correct. Yes.
Yeah, like those YA or in middle grade graphic novels. The most successful one was drawn by Gabriel Picolos, a person who became extremely popular, basically for taking DC characters and putting them in those situations himself.
Yes, and all of those successful YA DC novels are, they're not in canon. They are very, very much the same kind of material. So it's notable that DC is successfully producing material for this kind of audience. Webtoon is something that goes through a different platform. It goes through your mobile phone and is most successfully read in your mobile phone. And converting it to print is very difficult for that reason. Although, my God, some of the lettering on there, I mean, I know I'm old, but I don't know how anyone can read that lettering because it's so small. Jesus. All of this pandemic, I keep having flashbacks to things. And I'm pretty sure I mentioned this last time, but, one of them that I keep flashing back to is Diane Nelson saying that Diamond might not even be solvent. I just hear that over and over in my mind. And another thing that I hear over and over in my mind, because it's so essentially truthful, is when I interviewed Tom Akel, okay, who used to be the head of Webtoon. Have you ever had Tom on your show?
I have not, no.
Oh, you should. You should. So I'm sure he'd love to come on because he has a whole business that he could talk about. But so Tom ran Webtoon, and he ran it from what I guess I could call the Occidental standpoint. Like he had Stan Lee doing a webcomic, and he hired a lot of Western creators like Fabian Nicieza and Dean Haspiel to do webtoons. And none of them were wildly successful, although certainly some of them were modestly successful. So, but I asked Tom about that, and without really coming out and saying, if you just hire James Tynion to write Batman and slap it up on Webtoon, it might not be successful. That's pretty much what he said.
Yeah.
It's like it's a whole new sensibility, and like it is, how do you do, fellow kids? It's really it's so smart that DC did say, hey, Webtoon, you can handle this. We don't have to micromanage it and put Dennis Hopeless writing this.
Whoa, a random slander to Dennis Hopeless? My God, he goes by Dennis Hallam now. Come on now.
Well, he doesn't even exist. He has the best meme to make fun of. Come on.
I will say, though, I mean, I think that's very smart, especially given I'm going to take a turn to dunk on somebody unintentionally, but it's true. AWA put up their comics on Webtoon, and it was like just I think like a wing and a prayer. And right. Their wing and their prayer were not answered because AWA's content is about as far from Webtoons as you can possibly ask for. And it's just, I mean,
very probably as far from what most normal humans want.
Whoa, shots fired. Shots fired, Jeff Passan.
Those particular comics were just bizarre. Let's be honest.
Yeah, they were very weird. They're not the most enjoyable stuff I've read. But either way, I mean, the point is like if you're going to go on Webtoon, you're gonna want to go on there and you're gonna want to fit within the crowd. But I want to get your perspective on this. I know why DC did this.
Right.
What's in it for Webtoon?
So the next day, as the crow flies, Webtoon Naver's CEO did a big press conference in Korea, the first he'd done in 2 years, and he touted all these big deals that they were doing. And
like with Archie.
I don't know if he mentioned Archie, to be honest, but he did mention DC, and he did mention their deal with the company whose name I'm forgetting right now that owns BTS. So, which was a huge deal. And now that made all the papers in Korea.
Oh, yeah.
That they were teaming with the BTS company. But he did mention DC. So again, I would refer you to the IPO race between Naver and Kakao. So what's in it for them? I mean,
now they could say that they're making DC comics,
right? And it's for investors, and it's good for American investors to say, hey, we got Batman, we got BTS, we got Batman,
all the important bees.
We got the
killer bees.
You got the killer bees, but yeah, I'm sure if you looked at it, some sort of licensing list of the most recognizable brands in the world, both BTS and Batman would be in the top 20, if not the top 10. So
probably, yeah.
So they're looking really good. And what, David? What the hell is happening at Tapas at the same time.
Is this a test? Because I don't have an answer for it.
No, you don't. And so Pluggerino, I don't know when this is going live, but
Monday.
Monday. All right. Well, as you're listening to this on Monday, just last Friday on More to Come, my regular podcast that I do for Publishers Weekly with Calvin Reed and Kate Fitzsimmons, Calvin and I interviewed Michelle Wells and Jamie S. Rich of Tapas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's their first interview they've done since they took over editorial, more or less. And I will say it's, these are corporate people and big corporate moves. So it's probably not, candid as, I mean, there's some candor in there. I'll say that. It's a spoiler. But anyway, I would say go back and listen to that. And they're ramping up.
Right.
They're also in this arms race. So I think all of these things, I guess some of what Brandon Schatz was responding to in his, hindsight is 2020, and what we're responding to in this, whoa, things are crazy, is that there are these giant corporate moves that are really driving a lot of this. And like the players are getting bigger and bigger on our little comics, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, you look at the companies that are involved. I mean, we've talked about a company owned by Amazon. We've talked about a company owned by whatever the hell owns DC now. I mean, who?
Right.
Discovery? Warner Brothers?
Yeah.
AT&T? All of them, all of the above? I don't know.
Right.
Disney, Naver. I mean, like, people don't know Naver, but I mean, it is very, very large. I mean, all these companies are gigantic, and it is interesting. I do think, though, that I keep being surprisingly supportive of DC's moves, but as much as I am always skeptical whenever like Jim Lee does an interview, just because I presume 99% of it is spin, I will say that this very much fits within their overall plans that they're talking about. And I have to admit, I think a lot of their plans are pretty smart. I mean, I don't know if they're necessarily universally designed for the direct market smart, but I think that they're pretty smart.
Right. They are to some extent. I mean, if you're talking about DC in particular or AT&T in particular.
I mean, no, I'm talking about DC Comics. I'm talking about, like,
okay.
I really think that they're looking to broaden in ways that the world is actually moving. Like, the very global perspective they have on a lot of this, and like the move to Webtoon and varying other efforts. I mean, it seems to be, I don't know if it's working 100% of the time, but I think that their approach right now, not to make it a Marvel and DC thing, but DC's approach is much smarter to me than Marvel's. Marvel's just seems to be a chase to the bottom.
Right.
Despite the fact that I do read more Marvel comics, I will say that, like, I don't really understand what they're doing from a publishing standpoint. I mean, they just had this big tentpole announcement of 8 comics this week, and I don't know how that moves the needle. But
right.
I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like they were, it was, they announced. So yeah, I mean that was a big announcement. So they announced 8 new titles that will be tentpole titles. They were mostly characters who are not considered frontline characters. I think that's safe to say, right?
Well, I mean, one of them, I mean, half the books I would say probably were titles that were taking place of comics that already exist with the exact same creative teams. Like the Reckoning War thing was Dan Slott and assorted other Fantastic Four people. You had Chip Zdarsky and Marco Cacato doing the same thing for Devil's Reign that they are for Daredevil. Avengers Forever with Jason Aaron. I mean, it's
right. So it's just a rebranding. It's like Marvel Now. It's like, remember that I did that whole post where I looked at every time that Marvel had announced that they were like doing a new event, and it was like they literally did one that was called Marvel Now, and then they did New Marvel Now, and then they did the one
Marvel
after
Now
that was called
2.0.
Marvel Now. No, yeah, but it was still called Marvel Now, and it's like, it's worse than Suicide Squad, the Suicide Squad, right? So these giant companies are maybe not so good at branding sometimes.
I guess my thing though is like I would rather see people in comics shooting big shots like what DC's doing, rather than, I mean, granted, Penguin Random House is a big shot being shot to shoot, but at the same time, like the rest of it just feels kind of plain. And I don't know. It's just kind of weird. I mean, Brian Hibbs on your very site wrote his BookScan piece, what, last week, 2 weeks ago?
A couple weeks ago, yeah.
And he took Marvel to the woodshed, understandably, because they were, what, 16th in the Western publishers?
So it's embarrassing. It's absolutely appalling. And, I think one of the reasons why they renumber and rebrand all of their books like this is so that they can get new trades that don't have to be volume 5 or whatever. And I mean, their trade program is absolutely baffling to me. I mean,
it's so baffling.
It's so bad. And even Brian says it's improved, but they should just be slaying. And I just don't understand. They should add, with MCU so popular, they should just be number one. They shouldn't even be a contest. They'd just be crushing it. But maybe they don't have to. I mean, anecdotally, it's because of Ike Perlmutter. So, because he didn't want to carry inventory, and unfortunately, to be successful in the book world, you must carry inventory. So, I'm wondering if the Penguin Random House deal will change that at all.
Do you have any sense if the kind of, are there 2 Scholastic books that have been released now? I have no sense as to whether or not they had a real impact.
Right. Yeah. I don't either. I mean, we're just getting started with school again, and Scholastic book fairs may or may not be starting up at some point. So, which is usually what, that's a huge market for that kind of material. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Marvel, they definitely do things their own way.
Yeah.
They're like the Javi Baez and Francisco Lindor of comics.
Thumbs down.
Thumbs down. Well, they just got their own little culture. They have their own little culture that maybe they should have run by some other people before they went public with it. So, Marvel's very, very got its own culture, its own way of doing things, and you cannot tell them any different. So.
I do think one thing that's really interesting in all the digital stuff we were talking about in particular, and, Brandon referenced this in his piece on your site, but I mean, I wrote about this in the last couple of weeks, but the supply chain issues are worsening. And there was a lot of articles about manga. Nobody was talking about the other ones. I mean, it's not just manga. I mean, DC came out with a really big deal. I mean, you can't even order bags and boards right now, like, period. And I do think it's interesting to look at these digital efforts and through the prism of the uncertainty that surrounds the print product. And I'm not saying the print product's not going to recover in terms of like actually being able to be made, but it is interesting because I think if you look at Substack and if you look at like Scott Snyder's ComiXology Originals deal, and if you look at like, I don't know, varying other things that have been done. I mean, not to keep touting James Tynion, but like Razor Blades, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's, I mean, to me, a lot of that looks like insulation from uncertainty within the market. And I don't blame anyone for doing that.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, I do think if you're sitting there and, you care about this art form, well, Jonathan Hickman, Scott Snyder, James Tynion definitely love the art form and love the industry. This is a very, very clubby community in comics. And that's both the source of some of its worst crimes and its greatest strength. But they love comics. They love being in comics. And they are obviously trying to build new channels. I guess, I guess that's what everyone is trying to do
100%
right now, is build new channels. Because we've all seen that the old channels are very, very fragile. And, you're absolutely right. They're going to get more and more fragile. I mean, we are seeing these supply chain issues. I think paper will become more and more precious. I mean, I'm sitting on a mother load here, I have so many books in my apartment, but, they're going to be very valuable. I mean, we're already seeing that in the collectible market, but I bet you they're going to become collectible for even more people.
Right.
As they become, I mean, manga, like you say, there's a lot of manga titles you just can't get. And, thank God I never sold my Kazuo Umezu books, because I knew I should hold on to them. And, you can't find them. Some of those early Junji Ito books, too, you can't find anywhere. So
it is really crazy. I mean, there's so many shops that I've talked to that are just like desperate to get inventory. And I don't know. I mean, you had, God, I'm totally spacing the name of the guy from Viz, who's like their main person.
Kevin.
Kevin.
Hamrick.
Hamrick, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was saying it's just like they hope it gets sorted out by early 2022. And I'm like, whoa, I bet a lot of shops
Yeah.
did not enjoy
Yeah.
reading that.
Well, that would take a miracle.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's just really wild. But let's move on from this stuff. I had a question from a patron that fits into the general state of things, but is a much different area, but one that you quite like. David Kelly asks, are cons something you're going to look to this year, looking forward to getting back to? Like, is that a thing for you this year?
So, I just finished writing my preview of New York Comic Con for Publishers Weekly, which will be out in a couple weeks. And it was very difficult because everybody's calling an audible, right? Everybody's like, oh,
You
I
mean
don't
from like
know.
the vaccination stuff or what?
Yeah, well, just because we don't know where Delta's going to go. Like when they announced New York Comic Con back in April or May, everybody was racing out to get vaccinated. Rates are dropping. Everybody was like, this is going to be so much fun. We're going to all get together in the fall. Things are just getting better and better. Well, surprise, that isn't quite what happened. So, now we're looking at, it's a long preamble, but I was just reading a big article in the New York Times, but I do my own COVID research. And I had noted that it's actually plateaued here in New York, and in even in Florida, it's actually kind of plateaued, Delta rates. And so if it followed the trajectory, it would actually start going way down. And by October, we'd actually be looking at a much better situation, except that now the kids are going back to school, and who the fuck knows what's going to happen, right?
Right.
So, the short answer is absolutely. I mean, I had made plans to go to the Mice Expo last weekend. When I first heard about that, I was like, oh, outside small press show. Fuck yeah. I can't wait. And then it became, as it got closer, it's like a little problematic, and I didn't really want to travel. So New York Comic Con's my hometown show. I approached it with fear, but with each passing day, I started thinking about how great it will be. Even just the people who have told me locally that are going to be there that I haven't seen in nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I get so excited. I get so excited.
It's interesting though, because like I feel like the beat, if there is an actual beat to the beat, I feel like cons are such an essential part of it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's really like missing the I mean, last year was such an upheaval that I didn't really have time to think about it. It was just sort of like, it was quickly severed, and it's like the beach scene in The Suicide Squad. Everything happens really fast, right? And this year, it's more like, oh, it's May. I would normally be dieting for San Diego. I'd start my, 2 months out diet and exercise plan and shopping. And, oh, I'd be worrying about my panel, like the rhythm. When you've been doing something for 20 years, you get a certain rhythm to your life, and then it's taken away. So with New York, yeah, absolutely. Like this time right now, 4 weeks out from New York Comic Con would absolutely be electric.
Right.
Electric with anxiety. And it is still filled with anxiety, and yet somehow it's not
the same.
It's not the same, but I have to say, even as I started working on this story and talking to people, I could sense a little excitement.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, like, I was, I have a press pass for Emerald City. I haven't decided if I'm gonna go yet, but I am excited. Like, I'm excited, but I still don't know if I'm gonna go. And it's such a weird thing because normally that would be a slam dunk. Obviously, I'm gonna go, but I don't know. I mean, it's such a, there's so many unknowns to it. Even though I have to say, credit where credit's due, ReedPop is doing the right thing.
Right.
In how they're handling it. And
absolutely big props to ReedPop.
If there's any way to mitigate it, it seems like they're going to try. But at the same time, there's a part of me that's like, do I want to go into a situation where it's just like mitigation versus like actual, I don't know. I mean, that's a tough thing, and I'm sure that's a question a lot of creators, I mean, I don't know where New York's at, but I'm shocked by how light Emerald City's guest list is so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more shocked when I go on Twitter and I search NYCC and I see people, who are coming. like flying in. I mean, MegaCon. I mean, MegaCon happened in literally the worst time for
And
death
place.
as and place. Orlando, like the mayor had declared a state of emergency in Orlando. They held a convention there at that moment, and some Mark Brooks was like, "Oh, I'm taking commission," or was it him? Or there was a bunch of people who were like taking commissions for MegaCon. I'm like, wow, okay, you are. Uh, I don't know what your deal is, but there you go. I had a long talk with Renee Witterstatter for my piece, my upcoming piece in Publishers Weekly. And Renee has a company called Eva Inc., where she manages a whole bunch of creators, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them are senior citizens. Mike Golden, Jim Shooter. And she was saying about how some of the creators she manages have pre-existing conditions, and they still have been out there since practically it began. She says they built little bubbles and would put some of them in the little bubbles,
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, for them, I think it's, they need to make money, or they want to make money. I don't think they need to make money. They can make money at home too. But some people are, chugging their ivermectin and coming, I guess. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, but David, we miss the community so much.
Oh, yeah.
This is such a social industry, and there's so much that gets done face to face and through these serendipitous encounters. Like I met you, I met you in Emerald City. Just, I was talking to somebody else at your table,
Mm-hmm.
and you introduced yourself, right?
Honestly, I don't even remember. Like, was that in the last 2 years? Because I don't remember anything that happened before now.
No, it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. I mean, it's like, that is the magic of cons, is like, you never know who you're going to meet, and you never know what kind of relationships you're going to foster. And not just from not really even necessarily from a networking standpoint. It's just like, you just might make friends, and like, that stuff's great. And I don't know. I really hope, I mean, I want to go. I still don't know if I'm going to go. So you're all in on going to NYCC?
Well, I mean, I'm all in on being near the Javits Center at the time that NYCC is taking place.
So it's a gateway to seeing people you want to see, but not necessarily on the con floor.
So here's my literal thinking at this moment. Okay, New York Comic Con in pre-pandemic times was known for spreading illness like nobody's business. It was definitely one of the most con crud infected shows of the year. It was horribly crowded, and the Javits Center has terrible ventilation. So I don't think it's a safe place at any time. All right. Now, that said, for 2021, they have quite a few mitigation factors. Everyone is going to be required to be vaccinated. I hate to say it.
Or have a negative test, right?
Right. That's only for children. No.
Oh,
it's only for people under 12 who can't be vaccinated. You must be vaccinated if you're an adult. Okay. Now, there's so many breakthrough cases that really doesn't mean any kind of safety to me. All right. However, if they do have wider aisles, better ventilation, and they're going to be using the new wing of the Javits, which is a new modern building that I went over to peek in, and I couldn't go inside, but I walked around. It does seem to have nice high ceilings.
Does it replace the airplane, or like the airplane hangar?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
I love the airplane hangar.
Right.
Unpopular opinion.
Right. No, everybody loved that. Are you joking? Everybody loved it. It had a high ceiling. It had natural light. It had ventilation.
Awesome.
Yeah. Then most of the Javits Center has terrible ventilation. And that's dangerous. That's very dangerous. Oh, here goes my phone again. Jesus. So this is, and like I say, I do my own reading from sources that are, scientific, and, data driven about what is really going on. So we all joke that we're going to wear masks when we go back to cons, no matter, even if they found a cure for COVID-19 tomorrow, because we don't want to get con crud, right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, I don't know if I've really been sick in a traditional manner since the pandemic has started, because when I go out, I often wear masks, and I'm not being in contact with, I don't even work in an office anymore. I used to work in an office, and now I work from home permanently. And it's, I mean, I don't, if anybody wants to keep wearing masks after this is all over at cons, I would not blame them in the slightest.
Right. No, we're absolutely going to see a segment of the con-going audience continuing to wear masks. I mean, I think, I've been asked to moderate some panels at New York Comic Con, including some pretty high-profile ones. And I just said, look, somebody told me Lambda's coming, which the vaccinations absolutely don't count. Now, I don't know if that's true. That is not a credible source to me. That
You know what's
I heard it
terrible?
from. What?
I immediately was like, is that a comic guest that I don't know about? And then I realized you're talking about a variant.
Yeah, I'm talking,
And not
I,
a comic variant.
I don't think a new variant will take over too quickly in 4 weeks' time. So, I'm going to. So here's the deal to everybody listening. I'm going to go into the new wing with my mask on and do my panels in this new well-ventilated wing, unless something really, really drastic happens. And then I have picked out a few spots near the Javits where I'm going to be hanging out that are mostly outside, and just tell people, if you want to hang out, come see me over there.
Seems fair
I
to
don't.
me.
Right. I might take one hazmat suit, be suited, walk around the show floor, and we'll see. I mean, I'm going to have to. I mean, there's no way I can't be that close and not do it. But, I'm not going to be in a crowded place where unmasked people are yelling and expelling. So no BarCon,
Oh, no.
BarCon. No,
Yeah.
we'll never. There probably will never be a BarCon again.
I already didn't really do it. I have to admit, I have a friend who's her catchphrase effectively is nothing good happens after midnight. And I actually have
She's
long
full of shit, but go on.
I have to admit, I always feel great in the morning when I go to cons because I stop going out at night and everything, and I feel awesome. I just go out and have a nice dinner afterwards and just chill. And I'm a ridiculous human being. I understand that is very unusual for cons, but it works out for me. But okay, let's move on. Last thing I want to talk about before closing with some happy thoughts. Do you think so? All this stuff, there's the Webtoon deal, there's Substack. There's all kinds of other things going on.
There's Brian Bendis taking, his line to Dark Horse. There's ComiXology with Scott Snyder. There's just everybody, all the people at various comic companies jumping from one company to another. Everybody's going from IDW to Boom, from Boom to DC, from everywhere to Tapas. I mean, there's so much in motion right now.
I just gotta say, this is terrible, but I don't think the Jinx World move was that big of a deal.
No, but I'm just saying
it's part of the everything's in flux, everything's fluid right now.
Yeah.
So we're definitely agreed upon that, but I don't know. I mean, do you feel like we're on the precipice of another shoe dropping? Do you think there's something else? Because it just. Like, I think of the direct market largely in thinking in 18-month windows. That's just kind of how they plan. And we're now kind of officially, if you think of solicits and if you think about the way that they structure things, we are firmly in that 18-month window. Do you think there's something coming? Or do you think like this was kind of the brief deluge before whenever the next deluge comes?
So I think that Brandon in his column just talks about really, that this is post-normal and there's a new way of doing things and he's moving on. Brian Hibbs, who's my other retailer columnist, both Brandon and Brian write for The Beat. And
I will note really quick, almost polar opposites. It's kind of astonishing.
Absolutely. And plug. We have a Twitter Spaces conversation with both of them coming up on Panel to Panel. Another thing that I do with Brian Heater and Anthony Haas. So that will plug. Look for that. That'll be good, right? So Brian was also going to retire his column. And, it's a little bit like all the, the Republican senators who retired a couple years ago because they knew they didn't want to face, ivermectin candidates, right? I mean, it did happen. A lot of them retired. So it was a little bit that, but it was also... I just said to Brian, Brian, he was leaving because I lost my sponsor, but I did find a new sponsor for it. And because I said, Brian, you can't leave now. This is it. When Penguin Random House takes over, this is the new way. I said, this is the biggest change. I said, you can't leave us without writing about that. And, he said he was going to continue. And, Brian and I disagree about everything, but I value his opinions on everything. And so See, I mean, I think we're still even dancing around the biggest one, which is Penguin Random House. You know, now they have. I don't know what. I mean, what are you hearing about that?
In regards to what? Like whether or not
In
it's
regards to like, will they? Would they? Are they gonna? Are they going to distribute it other companies? Are they going to distribute other periodicals?
I've heard absolutely nothing about it. I don't even I mean from I couldn't even tell you if other people are pursuing them, if anything like that's happening. I've heard nothing. And I've honestly, like, largely besides like some initial hiccups when it came to solicitations and stuff involving like Marvel's first run where they like Chris Claremont was labeled, or like Len Wein and Chris Claremont were labeled on like a whole bunch of books and it didn't make any sense. But I mean, besides that, I mean, most of it has been pretty quiet. And have you heard anything?
Well, I have, because to me, like the fate of Diamond, the new, you know, like Diamond is going in like Smeagol and coming out like Gollum, man. You know, my precious games. Um, so I mean, what is going to happen with them? Because it is like Diamond going on. So I talked to two publishers in recent, and who had before been like, "Oh, Diamond will survive; they'll be fine," and now they're like, "Wow, they're really not doing well with this." You know, like they're making a lot of mistakes, and they're not pivoting. They don't seem to be making changes that are, because they can survive. Absolutely, they can survive losing Marvel and DC.
I
It
don't know if
just
they, but I mean, do they want to stay in the comics game when it's just like the lower tier ones? I don't know if it's gonna, because they could just do games. They could just do. I mean, they're selling they're doing distribution for Funko now. At a certain point, it's like, do they want to keep doing it? If the other channels are much more profitable, it's like, do you want to be in the red and one? I don't know.
what do you think Eric Stevenson's answer to that is?
I have absolutely no idea, and I would never even dare to speculate on that idea. But I will say that every time somebody says that Diamond's going to die, Diamond doesn't die.
Right.
And there has to be a theoretical limit to that, or an actual limit to that. But so far, we've reached the theoretical limit, and they have maintained their zombie-like nature. And I don't know. I mean, I would say if anything is going to be the next big shoe to drop, it's going to be a major change in distribution. And I don't know how many more major changes we can have that before we get to the point where Diamond just doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Well, I keep hearing, I think it's significant that a lot, not a lot, but several smaller publishers have gone over to Lunar, okay? Because, we saw, who was it? I think Scout, Ahoy,
Scout did, yep.
And now Z2 has gone over there as well. And why? They sell more copies. They sell radically more copies when they go with Lunar. Why? It's because the retailers have to order from Lunar because they carry DC Comics. And then there's these three other companies on there. So instead of having to wade through the 400-page catalog, there's just a little segment on the order sheet. So they're like, I guess I might as well order one of these, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I'm told that there may be, well, there certainly are in talks about the possibility of more distribution players entering the game.
Oh, that's just what everyone's excited for. More distributors.
Right. But in the real world, there's all kinds of distributors.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, look at somebody like Third Eye, Steve Anderson at Third Eye Comics. I mean,
Right.
he deals with like 1 billion distributors. That dude sells like vinyl. That guy sells games, toys, etc., etc. He has a different person for every single one of those. And honestly, I think the very spread out distribution model is going to be the future, because I had somebody tell me recently that comic shops are not going to be comic shops. They're going to be like comic emporiums with like that sell nerd stuff everywhere. And like that's
Right.
kind of the way they're they're gonna be like bookstores with like nerd stuff that they're selling. And I think I don't know if it's gonna be as easy to survive as a single very single threaded focus on just comics, which is interesting because in a lot of ways the direct market is doing better than it has in forever.
Well, that's right. It is. So, but I do think, one of the things Brian Hibbs said in his book scan column was that, we don't know how many graphic novels are sold because, or actually not in the book scan, but through the Diamond numbers, because like Diamond numbers on graphic novels have been in the crapper. right? Because nobody orders graphic novels through Diamond.
Right.
Because, so it's like people are already seeing better ways to do this. They're already diversifying their product mix. And I mean, I feel like, what does Penguin Random House get out of this, right? Why are, Penguin Random House is another big, giant corporation, international corporation, Bertelsmann Group. What do all these big giant corporations get out of being in the comic space, where the number one joke, which I probably say every time I'm on your show, how do you make a small fortune in comics?
Start with a big fortune.
Yes, that's been proven over and over and over again in the past. So why are they investing? And Penguin PRH is absolutely investing.
I don't know. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see. But okay, let's close with one thing that's not related to any of this. We both run comic sites. We should be reading comics to a certain degree. It sounds like you're not getting to do that as much as you want. What's one thing you've really loved this year in comics? Can be a comic, can be somebody's work, whatever.
Oh, well, I mean, I will say I have not read as many comics as I should, but one comic that I made myself sit down and read was Monster by Barry Windsor Smith, which is an old timer, but it had been in the works for so long. And I would say it's quite flawed, but wow, it's pretty incredible. His lettering in there is absolutely unbelievable.
The reverse webtoon for you?
Yes. So yeah, that was really great. I'm looking around here. I do have a big giant pile of comics sitting here. Well, the Ignatz nominations just came out, and as I was typing it up, I was like, wow, I never heard of this. Then I went and would look them up, and I was like, holy crap.
I had the exact same experience. I looked at your article on The Beat, and I was just like, I need to read some comics because these look really good.
Right? I mean, honestly, to answer your con question, I mean, I love New York Comic Con just for the social aspect. And it's just, pretty intense. But, oh, man, I so miss Small Press Expo and MoCA and TCAF. I miss the indie shows because that was just, that's my favorite comics to read are indie comics, small press comics, experimental comics. And, boy, I miss them so much. So, yeah, I'm going to, and a lot of them are available digitally. So I'm going to try to carve out some time when I'm off deadline. So never, really, because it is, I mean, David, look, little log rolling here. I mean, you've been doing an amazing job covering all of this. I think Sketch is one of the few places that actually has meaningful coverage of all of this, and I often look to you and quote you, and, you have a lot of fantastic information on there. And
I was very upset when you shared my stuff in your newsletter. I wasn't upset about you sharing it, but I sent you a gift from Better Off Dead saying I want my $2, and I never got a response. I was like, Heidi's too busy. Either that or she is not a fan of John Cusack 1980s rom-coms.
Well, I never saw those movies.
Oh, my God. This is what you should be doing with your life.
I am a Patreon. I already subscribed to your thing, so
I know.
Not $2.
It was fake sassing. But anyways, no, I mean, I haven't read Monster. I've heard nothing but good things. I always kind of do my binge reading for graphic novels at the end of the year. I don't know if you can possibly binge read Monster because it's huge and it's also like such a specific work in like, I don't know. I mean, like the people everyone who tells me that I need to read Monster is a comic creator, and they're just like enamored with it. And I don't know. It's like, I feel like that's the type of thing where I'm going to need like light a candle and get like a glass of wine and like really like dig into the experience.
A confession. I read it on my iPad.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I don't actually have a copy, a physical copy, which I would enjoy as a handsome knickknack around the house. But on the iPad it was easy because there's so much detail in it, and you can just pinch and swipe and take a look. So
I sort of feel like we just went full circle. I feel like that's like the moment we've been building to this entire time. So we're going to end there. Heidi.
Pinch and swipe.
Pinch and swipe. That's the name of this episode. Heidi, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about pinching and swiping, this crazy world we're in, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Always a pleasure, David. I really, and when shall we two meet again and fire, foe, or fen? Like, my God, next time we talk, can you imagine?
Oh God, who knows?
Oh, yeah, who knows? So.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with The Beat's Heidi MacDonald. You can find Heidi on Twitter at ComiXace and The Beat at comicsbeat.com. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content, and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Raj Patel, Brian, Submed Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Buon, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Pollard, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambeg, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzzbubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingas, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwant, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.